This is All India Radio. In the program Spotlight, now we bring you a discussion on GST Council meeting and its outcomes. The participants are Shubhamoy Bhattacharjee, Economic Analyst, and Sonu Sood, AIR Correspondent.
15 days after the 43rd meeting, the 44th meeting of the GST Council was held today, where recommendations of the group of ministers regarding rationalization of GST on COVID relief material were considered and decisions were taken based on these recommendations. Shubhamoy, can you tell us about the significance of the formation of the GUM and the significance of today's meeting?
The GST Council has been meeting. In fact, the GST Council had met in October, and then because of the pandemic and lots of other reasons, it was not able to meet, and it has met only now. And then this was in May when the GST Council met, and obviously because of such a long delay, there was a lot of things that was on its plate. Chiefly, the major things that was there was whether there should be a duty cut on medical equipment and medicines because of the pandemic. Now, there were two demands that was there from several states. One was that it should be exempted, and the other was that it should be not exempted, but the rates should be brought down to zero, because zero is also a rate under GST. So that was the condition on which the GST Council's meeting, there was a discussion. And because of that, the GST Council decided to set up a group of ministers in that meeting to decide what should be the appropriate rates or whether there should be exemptions. And as expected, the group of ministers have decided that the rates should be lower for almost everything which has something to do with the pandemic. So all the medicines, medical equipment, oxygen canisters, and all the other things, the rates will be lower, especially those which are being imported from abroad. So even if they are being imported on a personal basis, they will now get a lower rate of duty.
Medicines, oxygen and oxygen generation equipment, testing kits and machines, and other COVID-related relief material like pulse oximeters, hand sanitizers. There are about 18 broad categories of products which have been brought under the ambit of this decision. So you feel that this will be a big relief for the patients who are using these equipment, or even a common man who, in order to prevent getting this disease, is using many of these products?
Essentially, it reduces the cost of medical care for those who have facing the COVID pandemic. And that is the major thrust of today's exercise, that the rates of duties have been brought down substantially. Now, of course, many of these items, as you know, Sonu, are basically those for which India doesn't have adequate production capacity, and these needed to be imported. Lower duty essentially helps people get access to these items at a lower price, and the price reductions are quite substantial. So it is therefore beneficial. It was also beneficial because COVID and its impact, no one can say for sure that there will not be any other waves or there will not be any other times when it will not be needed. So reduction in the cost is definitely something that should be welcomed.
There are products like ambulances, 28% to 12%, the GST has been reduced. So you feel that hospitals also will benefit from this in terms of their costing?
Certainly. I mean, overall the cost expenditure is lower. Now, the interesting thing about this entire exercise was not just the reduction in cost. That was expected. I mean, as soon as the Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman announced last time the formation of a group of ministers who will look into this and will take a decision, it was more or less expected that the group will recommend a reduction, and it has happened accordingly. The interesting thing is, going beyond the medical issues now, it has also put the GST mechanism on other items on a fairer footing. I mean, I think that is what is an interesting thing to look at. What is happening now is that first of all, the GST mechanism has obviously started yielding much larger revenue to the center and the states as was expected, and it is now stabilized. What's also happening is that the formation of a group of ministers has happened after a long time. And this group of ministers is a sort of, one should say, a precursor to formation of other group of ministers also as and when GST is to be decided on contentious issues. That the reason for that is there are many items that will keep on coming on the plate of the finance ministers in the GST Council meeting. And it will not be possible to have a uniformity of views. The formation of the willingness of the finance ministers to form such groups of ministers is a very useful initiative. Basically, it helps to take the discussions onto a non-acrimonious platform. And that, I think, is a very major takeaway from the formation of this GOM.
So how soon do you feel these new tax rates will be operational? On most of the items, either the taxes have been lowered, and we find that on vaccines, they have been retained at 5%. So how soon will these lower tax rates be operational?
So now GST Council has decided, they'll be written in the rules. So that would come along immediately. In the sense that will be for any consignment and everything, the ministers group would have decided that it should be either with effect from, say, future date or from a date going back, depending on what the tax officials feel. These are the point. Once a decision has been done, and the decision has been sort of accepted, and that is what the advantage of having such GOMs are, then it's easy to write the rules which best reflect those decisions. It was not possible otherwise when ministers, as we saw in several cases in the past few months, when there was wrangling, that was not helpful. But now, with a unanimity, with willingness to accept each other's point of view, the decisions would be useful and decisions would be implemented.
The group of ministers recommended that these cuts in rates should be valid till August end. And the GST Council, after its discussion today, extended them till September end. So do you think there may be a need to extend these provisions further, depending on the situation of how COVID develops?
Well, Sonu, that is something that we shall have to see. The lay of the land as the days and the months progress. Depending on how the pandemic shapes up. And I suppose that's for the medical experts to be able to give a better advice and suggestion. I suppose the GST Council is being prudent in saying that why just August? Who knows? We might need it for some more months. And instead of, again having to come up with a notification, we might as well allow it. What it also does is all this thing, of course, they are not very heavy duty items, but what happens is that the reduction in duty, when it has been accepted by both the center and the state, it accepts the fact that there is going to be a loss of revenue. Centers and states are willing to accept mutually that this loss of revenue is something that we shall have to factor in when we decide on terms of our division of the tax revenues. It has been a debated point over the last 1 year, in fact more, the tax buoyancy of the states as assured by the GST system of about 14% wasn't happening. And there's a compensation cess that the center is providing. And there have also been reports that the compensation cess that was up for distribution wasn't adequate, for which there has been a decision that they will borrow from the market. Now, all of these things, it's not as if the center is raising taxes and the center and the state and giving it to the state. GST is a joint taxation mechanism. By having a group of ministers, what you do is you allow for a common accepted thing that yes, this year, for instance, the rate of growth of taxes will not be as was expected. So there will be shortfall. Then both are willing to accept, and that helps the economy to do better because it gives a signal to everybody that there is a word that we use, this cooperative federalism, that essentially the two sides or rather the center and states together are willing to accept that we'll have to live with a smaller cake and share it accordingly.
All these COVID-related products, most of them, the GST has been brought down to 5%. Now, vaccines, there was hope that the GST will be reduced, but that has been retained at 5%. How do you see this decision in light of the fact that now the new system will come into effect where government will be buying 75% of the vaccines?
Well, essentially, as I said, there was a discussion that whether some of the items should be zero rate. Now, exemption and zero rate is not the same thing. Exemption means they go out of the GST. That would have been unfortunate for the manufacturers of whichever product, because that would have meant that they wouldn't be able to take a GST advantage. Zero rating is, of course, a rate by itself, and that allows manufacturers to take the advantage. In the GST scheme of taxation, exemption means that the item is out of the pale of GST, which means that a manufacturer, if she produces a particular good, she cannot take an input tax credit. That acts as a disincentive, which is why exemption from GST is not a good idea. But a zero tax rate, when a council says that this rate is zero and writes it as zero, is not the same thing. It means that the rate of tax is zero and the company can take an input tax credit. But even if you take at a zero rate, what happens is that the companies, then the input tax credit becomes so low that it becomes difficult for the company to get any substantial benefit by staying in the GST scheme mechanism. A vaccine by itself is not just the chemical that is being produced, but there's a lot of it that is also comes into it. There are lots of manufactured items go into the preparation of a vaccine. And it will become counterintuitive for companies and it doesn't help them if the input tax rate is so low. That means the government at some stage, either the center or the state, will have to come up with a mechanism to give them ways to take advantage of the input tax rate. It just complicates life. So a low tax rate is fine. A zero tax rate is too much of a good thing. It doesn't really help too much in terms of the advantage of keeping a manufacturing process going on. A certain amount of taxation of any goods is essential, and that is what the combined wisdom of the group of ministers has been.
So Shubhamay, this 5% GST on vaccines, according to the new announcement which has come from the government, that they'll be buying 75% of the vaccines and distributing them free. The 5% GST which will be collected, that will be going to the states also?
Yeah, I mean, whatever GST is collected, the division is always according to the GST formula. So even a single rupee that is collected, the formula for allocation is as per the GST law or the GST rules that the center and the states have worked out in the GST council. So even that 5% that will come, of that, a percentage will go to it's roughly about 2/3 that goes to the state and 1/3 stays with the center. And that is exactly how there'll be no difference in terms of how the revenue from this particular from this particular thing will be shared among the center and the state.
In view of the pandemic, you feel that the decision that has come in today about reduction in the GST on many COVID-related relief materials, be it medicines, oxygen equipment, testing kits, or other COVID-related material, you feel that will be a big boost for the sentiment of people and also their it will provide them financial relief?
Certainly it will. And I would actually look at it in a different way. I'll say it's a much broader thing. The GST process between the center and the state over the last year and a half had got slightly acrimonious. And this was not good for the economy. It was actually also creating uncertainty for companies in not just medicine, but in several other sectors, that how the GST formula or the GST process would be working out. Now, this is one of the most major taxes that we have in India. If there is dispute or if there is uncertainty about how the tax is going to be administered, then that does no good to the economy. Remember, we have now had a lockdown, and because of which there has been quite a bit of an impact on the economy. When the economy is recovering, the signal that goes from today's meeting and rather today's announcement is that the center and the states are willing to work together, take quick decisions and appropriate decisions which help the economy, which help manufacturing units, whether in goods sector or within services, to take decisions without being bothered or without being apprehensive about, say, a turnaround in GST rules and stuff. So I think this is the largest signal, that you are essentially able to reconcile differences and are able to create an environment which allows for a faster revival of production in the economy. And I think that is how it should be read.
Thank you so much, Shubhamay.
Thank you.
You were listening to a discussion on GST Council meeting and its outcomes. The participants were Shubhamay Bhattacharjee, Economic Analyst, and Sonu Sood, AIR Correspondent. This program was produced and presented by the News Services Division of All India Radio. You can listen to it on our mobile app News on AIR. This program is also available on our website newsonair.nic.in. You may email your opinion about this program at airnsdtalks@gmail.com.